The Colombian Congress approved the health reform proposed by the government of Gustavo Petro with 14 votes in favor and 6 votes against. Chinese President Xi Jinping received Russian Premier Mikhail Mishustin in a meeting where the two leaders reaffirmed their country's determination to promote a multipolar world. And the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces resumed fighting in Khartoum, violating the 7-day truce brokered by the United States and Saudi Arabia. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Authorities in the Mexican state of Puebla reported on Tuesday the shooting death of journalist Marco Aurelio Ramirez Hernandez in the city of Tehuacan. According to the statement, the 69-year-old journalist was attacked by a group of armed men when he was traveling in his car after leaving his home. The human rights organization Article 19, or Artículo 19, indicated that Ramirez Hernandez worked as a journalist for almost 30 years in several media outlets, and in 2018 he worked in the mayor's office in Tehuacan. Article 19 demanded that the Puebla prosecutor's office investigate the murder through the Protocol Against Crimes Against Freedom of Expression and requested protection for the journalist's family and colleagues. Article 19 reaffirmed that 157 journalists have been murdered in Mexico since the year 2000 for carrying out their journalistic work. And Mexico's inflation is further in the first half of May amid declines in energy costs and lower fresh produce prices. According to the National Statistics Institute, the consumer price index fell 0.32% in the first 2 weeks of the month, with energy prices down 4.4% from the end of April, as seasonal residential electricity subsidies took effect in a number of cities. Likewise, gasoline and propane gas prices were also lower. In this sense, the decline in inflation from 7.82% at the end of 2022 led the Bank of Mexico last week to keep its reference interest rate on hold, ending a nearly 2-year monetary tightening cycle. However, with inflation still well above its 3% target, the central bank said it expects to keep the overnight interest rate target at the current 11.25% for an extended period. On Tuesday, the Electoral Observation Mission in Guatemala expressed its concern regarding irregularities and a growing judicialization, which may result in the total loss of legitimacy of the current electoral process. In a statement, the group of civil society organizations expressed that the current situation of the country is critical and reached this point due to the irresponsibility of political parties, which could not be adhering to the requirements of the laws and the electoral authorities. The mission also qualified as negative the non-registration of the presidential formula of Telma Cabrera and Jordan Rodas of the People's Liberation Movement Party. Guatemala's National Civil Police, the PNC, confirmed on Tuesday the capture of 32 members of a gang dedicated to extortion after an operation that raided 60 homes in different parts of the country. Teams made up of internal order agents and representatives of Guatemalan Public Prosecutor's Office served 27 warrants in Guatemala City and in the departments of Escuintla, Zacatepeques, Quetzaltenango, and Izabal. The PNC, in its report, detailed the capture of 6 women and 26 men, who were members of different criminal groups. As a result of tactical operations carried out last week in Guatemala City and Zacatepeques, 3 gang members were captured. Previously, from April 16th to 22nd, the PNC reported the arrest of 89 people as part of the different operations. On Tuesday, the former Panamanian President Ricardo Martinelli faces trial on corruption charges for alleged money laundering after having been acquitted in 2 previous trials on charges of wiretapping. The former president and 19 other people are being tried in the new business case opened by the Public Prosecutor's Office in 2017. This consists of a complex scheme of bank transfers through which illicit funds were transferred to a company for the sum of $43 million for the purchase of Editora Panamá América. In addition to this process, Martinelli will also face between August and October, together with his two sons, and the also former president Juan Carlos Varela, another trial for bribes from the Brazilian consulting firm Odebrecht. Let's move on to other topics. On Tuesday, Cuba's Communist Party held the 6th plenary session of its Central Committee. Among the many issues discussed, delegates centered dialogues in fostering creative resistance as part of the party's leadership role in facing the main challenge, which is the nation's economy.
The road is full of challenges and adversities which we have to face and overcome with a victorious spirit, with effort and talent, with commitment and unity, and above all with creativity. The issue is not just to resist, but to resist and create at the same time. We must move on from discourse to action with integral participation and agility, each one of us doing their part, encouraging, motivating, and demonstrating that it can be done. Let us effectively implement everything that has been discussed in this plenary session, and we will achieve victory. Thank you very much.
The government of Venezuela called as cynical the report presented by the United States, including the South American country in a list of countries or nations that did not fully cooperate in the fight against terrorism. As a response, Venezuela's foreign ministry recalled that the U.S. have sheltered and protected confessed terrorists, such as the Cubans Luis Posada Carriles and Orlando Bosch, who murdered 73 citizens in the 1976 attack against Cuba's flagship airline, Cubana Aviación. The Venezuelan executive repudiates the instrumentalization of such a sensitive issue to build unfounded accusations and points out that Washington's alleged anti-terrorist struggles have cost the world 4.5 million lives. The Foreign Affairs portfolio also stressed that Venezuela demonstrated its responsibility in this sensitive area year after year, fulfilling all national and multilateral obligations. On Wednesday, the 7th Commission of the Chamber of Representatives of the Colombian Congress approved the health reform proposed by the government of Gustavo Petro, with 14 votes in favor and 6 votes against. The Commission approved 143 articles that will change the country's health system and will allow the Colombians to have a health care model with quality infrastructure, health workers with proper salary, working conditions, and patients with comprehensive care, as said the Ministry of the Health in its Twitter account. Also, President Petro congratulated the congresspersons for the approval of the initiative, considered one of the pillars of his government. The reform proposes an operating model in which primary care centers and the comprehensive and integrated networks will be made up public, private, and mixed entities.
I want you to realize of this ramification of this decision you have made today. This reform will definitely improve the lives of people for whom access to health care was an aspiration, not a right.
And Ecuador's National Electoral Council approved the budget for the early presidential and legislative elections scheduled for August 20th. The budget approval came after the President Guillermo Lasso dissolved the National Assembly using the cross-death mechanism and brought forward the vote scheduled for 2025. Lasso's decision came as lawmakers tried to impeach him for not stopping a deal between the state-owned oil transport company and a private tanker company. Elections had to be called within 3 months for both the Assembly and the presidency, and the winners will serve out the remainder of the terms of those elected officials. If there is no outright winner, a runoff vote will be held in October. And now, let's take a short break. But remember, you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other studies coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. On Wednesday, in Germany, climate activists from the Last Generation group held a press conference to denounce the latest police persecution against 7 of their members. Members of the Last Generation reiterate that the police forces continue to attack members of the organization as if they were criminals, and that on Wednesday they suffered raids on their own homes. According to Amy Van Balen, the spokesperson for the group, these actions frightens its members. Wednesday's raids were ordered on suspicions that the activists were forming or supporting a criminal organization, according to a joint statement from the police and the Bavarian prosecutor's office. The justice instance also informed about 15 properties were raided, the seizure of 2 accounts, and said it ordered to froze several assets. Authorities in Spain on Wednesday announced that police forces arrested 4 suspects involved in a vote buying scandal. The civil guard confirmed that the number of detainees increased to 14 people in a vote buying scandal after the arrest on Wednesday in the town of Mojácar in Almería, a city of the autonomous community of Andalusia, in addition to the autonomous city of Almería, where the national police arrested less than a week before 10 people, also allegedly linked to the vote buying. Among the first detainees were members of the autonomous government of Melilla and the Coalition for Melilla party. The first 10 people arrested have been released after testifying before the police, accused of electoral crime, while waiting for the magistrate María del Carmen Perles, the head of the Second Court of Instruction of Melilla, who is in charge of the case, to summon them as accused in the next few days. And on Wednesday, the president of China, Xi Jingping, received Russian Premier Mikhail Mishustin in a meeting where the two leaders reaffirmed their country's determination to promote a multipolar world. The Chinese head of state and the Russian premier declared that their nations and the peoples are jointly resisting attempts by some Western countries to impose their will and maintain world dominance. They also appreciated the good neighborliness and the strength of their cooperation, which is estimated to exceed 200 million euros in 2023. Mishustin's 2-day trip is the highest level visit by a Russian official to China since the start of the armed conflict in Ukraine. In this regard, Chinese President Xi Jinping declared on Wednesday during a meeting in Beijing with Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin that his country is ready to build its relations with Moscow on the basis of mutual support and taking into account the key interests of both nations. At the same time, he stressed that Moscow and Beijing should continue to exploit the potential of their partnership through trade and investment. The Chinese leader stressed the need for the two countries to intensify their joint work in international forums and organizations such as the UN, the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the G20. For his part, the head of the Russian government said that Moscow frankly appreciates China's good neighborliness and the special importance of China for Russia in conditions of growing turbulence in the international arena. And the Russian President Vladimir Putin took part in the round of consultations between Russia and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations being held in Moscow. Via video conference, Putin reiterated his intention of strengthening ties in every possible way. He emphatically said his country appreciates friendly and respectful relations with all nations of the world and pledged to reinforce such ties. He referred to growing global instability promoted by the United States in its eagerness to maintain dominance by imposing rules and developing individual alliances. The meeting, being held in Moscow, hinges upon strategic stability and arms control and has been called on by Cambodia. And now we move on to other topics. The Russian group South thwarts another attack by the Ukrainian armed forces. The group's spokesperson, Vadim Astafiev, reported the attack took place in the towns of Avdeneivka, Marinka, and Alexandro Kalinovo, where significant casualties in personnel and armored vehicles of the Ukrainian armed forces were confirmed. Likewise, Astafiev assured the attack did not cause any losses to the Russian troops. Meanwhile, other offensives targeted positions of the Ukrainian units and an ammunition depot in Lysychansk and Skanova. And Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu warned on Wednesday that Moscow will respond harshly to attacks on Russian soil after jets and artillery fought off an armed group that crossed from Ukraine.
We will continue to respond promptly and extremely harshly to such actions by Ukrainian militants. The remains of the nationalists were pushed to the territory of Ukraine, where they continued to be defeated until they were completely eliminated. More than 70 Ukrainian terrorists and also vehicles and armored vehicles were destroyed.
And TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries using StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. On Wednesday in Turkey, the leader of the ultra-nationalist Victory Party confirmed his support for opposition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu in the second round of presidential elections to be held next Sunday. Local media asserted that Turkey ultra-nationalist Victory Party leader Ümit Özdağ and the opposition candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu signed a memorandum of understanding for the presidential runoff election. Özdağ's decision comes after candidate Sinan Ogan, who won nearly 2.8 million votes as the third presidential candidate, and earlier this week pledged his support for President Erdogan. Kılıçdaroğlu also has the support of the main pro-Kurdish party, which accounts for 11 or 10% of the vote in the first round. The Sudanese army and the rapid support forces resumed fighting in Khartoum on Wednesday, violating the agreed 7-day truce brokered by the United States and Saudi Arabia. In this sense, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken warned that the ceasefire violators will be held accountable through sanctions and other tools, as the latest agreement between the country's two warring sides failed to hold hours after going into effect. The newest ceasefire aimed at the resumption of essential services and humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, with intense fighting over the weekend and Monday, experts agreed that neither side in Sudan's conflict has an interest in stopping hostilities, since both seek to increase their battleground advantages to strengthen their hand at the negotiations table in the near future. And the Joint Committee of Libya's antagonist parliamentarians met in Morocco and reached an agreement to commit on a unified government in the country. The Libyan delegations, which included parliament members from the east of the country with headquarters in Tobruk, and from the High State Council, which administers the west, headquartered in Tripoli, called the 6+6 Committee, met in the Moroccan city of Bouznika with the United Nations support. They agreed on the need to a unified government in order to supervise the elections, and that they will also need a legislative body with a House of Representatives and a Senate. They also agreed on the mechanisms to elect of the head of state. On Wednesday, hundreds of protesters in Australia took to the streets in Sydney to rally against the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to the United States. The rally was scheduled to coincide with President Joe Biden's now cancelled visit to Australia.
President Biden, do you really want this to be your legacy? This is a Trump administration prosecution that criminalizes journalism. You have an innocent man in prison for the past almost 5 years now, and he needs to be free because the world needs press freedom and the U.S. has to practice what it preaches. Well, every day is a struggle because Julian is in a high-security prison in a small cell for 22 hours a day on average, and he spends a lot of time isolated, and we don't know when this will end. And he risks a 175-year sentence if extradited to the U.S., so we really need to get him out. But he sees that there's so much support for him all over the world and in Australia, especially in Australia, which is where the situation needs to be resolved.
And Gabriel Shipton, Julian Assange's brother, also called on the United States President Joe Biden to drop the charges preventing his brother's release, and as an action in behalf of the press freedom.
Julian and Julian's freedom has complete support, bipartisan support in the Australian Parliament. A recent poll in the Age and the SMH showed 79% of Australians agreed with the statement that Joe Biden should drop the charges against Julian. So really feeling the momentum around the support in Australia really building. Take it from me, look at every human rights NGO, every press freedom NGO in the United States, over 25 of the largest ones, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, ACLU, all calling on the Biden administration to drop this because of what it means to press freedom in the United States.
And the super typhoon Mawar barged the U.S. island of Guam as a powerful Category 4 storm on Wednesday, with high winds, heavy rains, and a dangerous storm surge that swamped low-lying areas as residents rushed to find shelter. According to the National Weather Service, Typhoon Mawar's center passed over the northern tip of Guam on Wednesday evening, accounting as the strongest storm to hit the territory of over 150,000 people in decades. Guam's Meteorology Service reported peak winds of 169 kilometers per hour. Lightning had become an increasing threat as conditions continued to deteriorate into the evening, with the Weather Service issuing extreme wind and flash flood warnings for northern Guam. Ahead of the storm, Guam Governor Lu Leon Guerrero ordered residents of coastal, low-lying and flood-prone areas of the territory to evacuate to higher elevations. And the Popocatépetl volcano in Mexico spewed more gas and ash into the sky as authorities maintained their warning level at one step below red alert. Dozens of shelters have been opened near the volcano, which has seen various periods of increased activity since awakening from slumber in 1994. In this sense, the President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, said the government is monitoring the volcano's activity on a daily basis, while confirming it had decreased slightly since the alert level was raised on Sunday. Meanwhile, Mexico's National Center for Prevention of Disasters stated that over the previous 24 hours, 22 volcanic exhalations of water vapor, volcanic gases, and ash had been detected, along with 2 explosions. The Popocatépetl, whose name means smoking mountain in the indigenous Nahuatl language, is considered one of the most dangerous in the world. And we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.